President Trump's latest appearance in the Oval Office quickly developed into a difficult and increasingly defensive exchange before the briefing was brought to an abrupt end. Among the most notable moments was his dismissive response to a bipartisan housing proposal that has attracted broad public support and is intended to improve housing affordability. Rather than signaling support, the president indicated little enthusiasm for the legislation and left open the possibility that he could oppose it altogether, despite growing pressure for action on housing costs. Recent reporting indicates that Trump described the measure as a big yawn and has instead prioritized other legislative objectives. Politically, the timing is striking. Housing affordability remains one of the most pressing concerns for American voters, and distancing himself from legislation designed to address that issue risks creating unnecessary political headwinds ahead of the midterm elections. Whether this reflects a broader strategic calculation or a legislative disagreement, the decision is likely to become a significant point of debate as both parties compete for control of Congress. The briefing also turned to another issue dominating the national conversation, the ongoing situation involving Iran. That exchange would soon become one of the most closely scrutinized moments of the entire appearance.
There'll be a meeting on that tomorrow in Doha, and to go into Qatar. I think they've already left, or they're just about getting ready to leave. So we'll see how that goes. But we're doing very well on that front. But the meeting in Doha is going to be perhaps important, perhaps not. We're going to find out. But we're winning militarily. It's almost won militarily, I would say. And it's really very simple. It's the denuclearization of Iran. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon, and they're not going to have a nuclear weapon.
The language itself was revealing. President Trump repeatedly framed the situation in uncertain terms, suggesting that developments may be very good or may not be very good, while also implying that the United States was close to achieving its objectives. The combination of confidence and ambiguity left the impression of an administration that was still defining its position rather than presenting a settled assessment of events. Critics argue that this uncertainty sits uneasily alongside the administration's diplomatic approach. They contend that if Iran's position had been weakened to the extent the president has claimed, there would be little reason to pursue negotiations, offering what they describe as substantial economic concessions through a memorandum of understanding, including the potential release of frozen assets and expanded oil export opportunities. From that perspective, the negotiations themselves suggest a more complex strategic picture than the president's public rhetoric alone would indicate. As discussed previously, critics have also pointed to reports surrounding efforts to arrange talks in Doha following the breakdown of the ceasefire, arguing that these developments further complicate the administration's public narrative. Taken together, they say, the president's remarks projected uncertainty about the direction of the negotiations and left unanswered questions about the broader strategy guiding U.S. engagement with Iran.
The Supreme Court ruling today in regards to the mail-in ballots, and what comes next for the SAVE Act after today's ruling?
Well, because of the mail-in ballot ruling, which was a little bit surprising, gives people more time to vote illegally, let's say. But the SAVE Act is even more important.
President Trump also turned his attention to a series of recent Supreme Court decisions, expressing frustration with outcomes that proved politically unfavorable for his administration. Among them was the court's decision not to intervene in the E. Jean Carroll litigation. In another closely divided ruling, the justices rejected an effort concerning the counting of ballots around Election Day, concluding that, unless federal law explicitly provides otherwise, the requested restrictions could not be imposed. A separate decision addressed presidential authority over independent agencies, permitting the removal of officials in some agencies while maintaining protections for members of the Federal Reserve. Taken together, the rulings produced mixed results overall, but two of the three decisions represented significant legal setbacks for the president. The discussion then shifted to the SAVE Act, legislation that has become the focus of intense political debate. Opponents of the bill argue that its practical effect would be to make voting more difficult for certain eligible citizens, reducing overall participation rather than strengthening election security. They contend that the legislation is less about preventing election fraud and more about reshaping voter turnout in ways they believe would provide a political advantage to Republicans. Supporters of the bill, by contrast, argue that it is intended to strengthen election integrity by requiring proof of citizenship for voter registration.
Parliamentarian? What were you asking about?
Yeah, have you talked with Thune about?
I have. No, I can't imagine why you'd keep a woman that was put there by Harry Reid and Barack Hussein Obama. I cannot understand it. The leader has the right to fire the person at will and put somebody else there. That would be, because we get so many negative rulings from her, the parliamentarian. She's been there for years, and she was put there by Harry Reid and Barack Hussein Obama. Harry Reid was a bad guy, and he was the leader, and he put her. And the speaker has the right to immediately fire her and put somebody else there. And it's not even believable that.
President Trump also appeared to conflate the roles of Congress's two chambers. The Senate does not have a speaker. That title belongs exclusively to the House of Representatives, where Mike Johnson serves as Speaker. John Thune, by contrast, is the Senate Majority Leader, reflecting the Senate's distinct leadership structure. The discussion then turned to the Senate parliamentarian, the nonpartisan official responsible for advising whether provisions in legislation comply with the Senate's procedural rules. While the Senate Majority Leader has the authority to replace the parliamentarian, doing so has historically been viewed as an extraordinary step. During the Biden administration, some Democrats urged then-Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to remove the parliamentarian to facilitate elements of the Build Back Better agenda. Schumer ultimately declined, citing insufficient support for such a move. President Trump is now urging John Thune to take the course of action that Chuck Schumer chose not to pursue. Thus far, however, Thune has shown no indication that he intends to remove the Senate parliamentarian, underscoring a clear difference in approach between the two congressional leaders.
Honest elections.
What are your plans for the housing bill, Mr. President?
I don't know. I think it's so unimportant by compared to the Save America Act. I think the Save America Act is exactly what it says. It's saving America from crooked elections. And the housing bill is a bill that can get approved. They worked on it long and hard. It's very bipartisan. That means the Democrats like it. I think it's maybe even, it's probably maybe more that way. They're getting things that I wouldn't necessarily agree to. Nobody knows more than housing in the history of the presidency. Nobody did well like me in housing. I made a lot of money. I made a lot of money with housing. But when I look at that bill, it's a bill. But when I look at the Save America Act, it's about saving America.
A bipartisan housing bill had already secured overwhelming support in both the House and the Senate, with margins large enough to override a presidential veto. Despite that broad backing, President Trump indicated he would not approve the legislation and subsequently canceled the planned signing ceremony, placing its future in doubt. For many Republicans, the measure had been expected to serve as a significant legislative achievement ahead of the midterm elections. With affordability and the cost of living ranking among voters' top concerns, party leaders hoped the bill would demonstrate tangible progress on housing. Instead, the president's opposition disrupted that strategy and created fresh uncertainty over legislation that had previously appeared on course to become law. From a procedural standpoint, the president's options are limited. Because the bill commands bipartisan, veto-proof majorities in both chambers, a veto could, in theory, be overridden if lawmakers maintained their support. Alternatively, if the president neither signs nor vetoes the legislation within the constitutional timeframe while Congress remains in session, it would automatically become law. The remaining question is therefore not only what action the president will take, but whether congressional support for the bill remains intact. Politically, however, the consequences may extend beyond the legislative process itself. By distancing himself from a proposal with bipartisan backing, President Trump risks allowing opponents to argue that he played no role in advancing a measure aimed at improving housing affordability. Rather than claiming credit for its passage, the administration now faces criticism for appearing to stand in the way of legislation that many lawmakers from both parties had already endorsed. A debate likely to feature prominently as the midterm campaign gathers pace.
Murkowski from Alaska. Nobody's done more for Alaska than me. She's Trump deranged, what can I tell you? But those 4 or 5 people that I mentioned should vote. How do you vote against Save America? How do you vote against it? How do you vote against voter identification.
Critics of the proposal argue that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud on a scale capable of determining national election outcomes in the United States. From their perspective, the legislation would do little to address proven problems and would instead make voting more difficult for some eligible citizens, potentially reducing turnout across the electorate. Some analysts have also suggested that any reduction in participation could affect Republican voters as well as Democrats. Those critics contend that the president's political calculation is that lower overall turnout would be electorally advantageous for his party. The bill also faces significant procedural obstacles in the Senate. Even if every Republican senator voted in favor, supporters would still need to overcome the chamber's 60-vote threshold for most legislation unless the filibuster were eliminated or bypassed. Republican leaders have consistently indicated that they do not intend to abolish the filibuster, arguing that the rule serves as an important institutional safeguard regardless of which party controls Congress.
Will you sign that housing bill?
I have not. It hasn't been sent to me yet. It's coming, I understand, and then I'll make it. Here's what I would like to sign. Much more than a bill. That big deal. It's a yawn. Some people say it's wonderful. To me, compared to the Save America Act, just about everything is a big yawn.
From a political perspective, the decision is difficult to reconcile with conventional electoral strategy. Publicly distancing himself from legislation that attracted broad bipartisan support raises obvious questions about the administration's approach heading into the final 2 years of the presidential term. Measures capable of securing veto-proof majorities have become increasingly rare in today's deeply polarized political environment, making this bill an unusual opportunity to demonstrate cross-party consensus. The legislation also presented an opportunity for the president to claim a significant policy achievement on an issue that consistently ranks among voters' highest priorities. Instead, by signaling opposition, the administration has shifted the political conversation away from the substance of the bill and towards its own decision-making. Critics argue that this approach risks creating unnecessary political difficulties, not only for the president, but also for Republican candidates preparing to contest the upcoming midterm elections.
Mr. President, Zohran Mamdani said in an interview this week that he was open to being the poster child for socialist candidates. Are you worried about more socialist candidates across the United States?
I think it's a big threat to our nation, actually, because it's not socialism, it's really communism. They use the word social democrat because it sounds so nice, but it's really communism you're talking about. I think it's the biggest threat to our nation there is, maybe since our founding. That includes World War I, World War II, September 11th. It includes the Pearl Harbor attack.
Pearl Harbor attack was part of World War II.
I think this is the biggest threat to our nation. People will smile when I say that, but the smart people are going to say, you know, he's probably right. It's basically introducing communism into the United States of America. There's never been anything so dangerous. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
The briefing came to an abrupt conclusion as President Trump brought the event to an early end and directed those present to leave the room. While the reasons behind that decision remain open to interpretation, the overall appearance is likely to be viewed by many observers as one of the administration's more difficult media performances. Politically, the exchange has also prompted fresh questions about the president's strategic approach, with critics arguing that a series of recent decisions could complicate Republican prospects in the upcoming midterm elections and potentially weaken the administration's position during the remainder of its term.